Marcus Thompson's weathered hands gripped the mop handle tighter as the principal's voice echoed down the hallway of Riverside Elementary. That man doesn't belong here during school hours. Security should escort him out immediately. The words cut through him like ice, even though he'd heard variations of them countless times over the past 15 years. Standing in his faded gray uniform with maintenance embroidered on the chest, Marcus watched 8-year-old Lily Chen peek around the corner, her small face creased with worry. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The security guard approached hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Sir, I'm going to need you to finish up and leave the premises. There's been a complaint about unauthorized personnel in the building. Marcus nodded silently, his dignity intact despite the humiliation burning in his chest. What they didn't know was that this unauthorized janitor had just donated another $50,000 to the school's scholarship fund that morning, anonymously as always. Lily suddenly darted from her hiding spot, her tiny sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. "Wait! Mr. Marcus isn't bad. He's my friend," she declared, positioning herself protectively between the security guard and the man who had become her unlikely guardian angel. The hallway fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Teachers emerged from their classrooms, drawn by the commotion, their faces a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Marcus had never intended to become attached to any of the children at Riverside Elementary. For 15 years, he'd maintained his cover perfectly, arriving each morning at 5 to clean classrooms and repair broken fixtures before the students arrived. His routine was simple: stay invisible, do excellent work, and keep his true identity buried beneath layers of humble service. The irony wasn't lost on him that the same building where he was treated as invisible housed children who desperately needed the very resources he could provide. He'd grown up in these same hallways 40 years earlier, back when the school was newer, and his own father worked double shifts at the textile mill just to keep food on their table. Young Marcus had sworn he'd never be invisible again, never be looked down upon for the work he did or the clothes he wore. That promise had driven him through business school, through countless 18-hour days building his shipping empire, and through decades of ruthless negotiations that had earned him a fortune most people couldn't imagine. But life had a way of bringing things full circle. After his wife Sarah passed away from cancer 5 years ago, leaving him childless and questioning everything he'd built, Marcus had quietly sold his company to a larger corporation for $800 million. The grief had nearly consumed him until he'd walked past his old elementary school one day and seen a help wanted sign for a custodian. Something about the idea of returning to his roots, of finding purpose in honest work again, had called to him. He'd applied under a false name, using forged documents that showed him as Marcus Thompson, a man with just enough background to qualify for the position, but not enough to raise questions. The real Marcus Thompson was a business legend, but this Marcus Thompson was invisible again, exactly as he'd planned. What he hadn't planned for was Lily Chen, the quiet second grader who'd started following him around during his afternoon cleaning routine. She'd appeared one day 3 months ago, hovering near the library as he restocked supplies. Unlike the other children who barely noticed his presence, Lily had watched him with curious brown eyes, eventually working up the courage to ask if he needed help carrying the heavy boxes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Most adults dismissed her because of her thick accent and shy demeanor, but Marcus had recognized something familiar in her careful observation of the world around her. Her grandmother Ming brought her to school each morning in a battered Honda that left a trail of blue smoke, and Lily always carried the same worn backpack that had clearly seen better days. During lunch, while other children played on expensive tablets or traded Pokemon cards, Lily sat alone reading library books that were probably too advanced for her age. Marcus had quietly started leaving interesting books where she'd find them, watching from a distance as her face lit up with each new discovery. The connection had deepened when he'd overheard her crying in the bathroom one afternoon, her small voice whispering to someone on her grandmother's old flip phone in Mandarin. Though his Mandarin was rusty, he'd understood enough to know that money troubles were weighing heavily on her young mind. That night, he'd anonymously paid her lunch account balance and arranged for her to receive free supplies from the school's emergency fund. another of his many invisible contributions. Now, watching this fierce little girl defend him against adults who saw him as nothing more than hired help, Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. In her eyes, he wasn't invisible at all. He was someone worth protecting, someone whose friendship mattered enough to risk getting in trouble with the principal. The realization that he'd found more purpose in 3 months of pushing a mop cart than in 30 years of corporate success hit him like a physical blow. The security guard shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between following orders and dealing with an 8-year-old's righteous indignation. Principal Williams emerged from her office, her expression stern as she surveyed the scene. "Lily, return to your classroom immediately. This doesn't concern you." But Lily stood her ground, her small chin raised in defiance, and Marcus knew that whatever happened next would change both their lives forever. Marcus Thompson hadn't always been invisible. 43 years ago, he'd been Marcus Chen, a scrappy kid whose parents had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but determination and a willingness to work 16-hour days at the neighborhood laundromat. His father, Wei, had taken the name Thompson when Marcus started school, believing an American surname would give his son better opportunities. In this country, Wei had told him in Mandarin, "You must be twice as good to get half as much. But you can do it, son. You have the mind for numbers like your grandfather." Wei hadn't been wrong about the numbers. By age 12, Marcus was balancing the laundromat's books and had figured out 3 ways to increase efficiency that saved them hundreds of dollars monthly. But being the smartest kid in class hadn't protected him from the daily humiliations of wearing the same 3 shirts in rotation, of bringing rice and vegetables for lunch while classmates had sandwiches and chips, of having his father pick him up in the delivery truck with Chen's laundromat painted on the side in both English and Chinese characters. The breaking point had come during his senior year at Riverside Elementary's sister school, when he'd been chosen as valedictorian but almost couldn't attend graduation because his family couldn't afford the cap and gown rental. His English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had quietly paid the fee herself, telling him it was a quote, the shame had burned worse than gratitude. That night, 17-year-old Marcus had made 2 promises. He would never again depend on anyone's charity, and he would never let money determine his worth or limit his choices. Those promises had driven him through business school on a full academic scholarship, through building Thompson Logistics from a single delivery truck to the largest independent shipping company on the West Coast. By 35, he owned a fleet of 200 vehicles and had contracts with major retailers across 3 states. By 40, he'd expanded into international shipping and was worth more than his immigrant parents could have imagined in their wildest dreams. Success, however, had come with its own isolation. The wealthier he became, the harder it was to trust people's motives. Business associates wanted deals, charities wanted donations, and women wanted security. His marriage to Sarah had been the one genuine relationship in his adult life. She'd been a pediatric nurse who'd met him when he was still driving delivery routes himself, before the money changed everything. She'd loved the ambitious young man who worked 18-hour days, not the millionaire he'd become. When Sarah died after a 3-year battle with ovarian cancer, Marcus had discovered that all his wealth couldn't buy the one thing that mattered most. He'd hired the best doctors, flown to experimental treatment centers around the world, and donated millions to cancer research. None of it had saved her. In her final weeks, she'd made him promise to find a way to be happy again, to use his resources for something meaningful rather than just accumulating more. Her death had left him questioning everything he'd built. The penthouse apartment felt like a mausoleum, filled with expensive furniture that no one sat on and gourmet kitchens where no one cooked. His company ran itself through competent managers, and he'd realized that he'd become completely disconnected from any sense of purpose. The business that had once been his passion had become merely a machine that generated money he didn't need and couldn't spend meaningfully. That's when he'd started his anonymous philanthropy, funding scholarships and medical bills and emergency assistance for families in crisis. But writing checks from a distance hadn't filled the emptiness Sarah's death had left behind. He'd needed something more hands-on, something that connected him to real people facing real struggles like the ones he remembered from his childhood. The decision to sell Thompson Logistics and return to Riverside Elementary as a custodian had been born from equal parts grief and nostalgia. He'd driven past the school one evening, remembering his own years there, and had seen the "Help Wanted" sign in the window. The idea had seemed absurd at first. Marcus Chen, the millionaire, becoming Marcus Thompson, the janitor. But something about the possibility of invisible service, of contributing without recognition or agenda, had appealed to him. Creating the false identity had been surprisingly easy when you had unlimited resources and the right connections. Marcus Thompson existed on paper as a 58-year-old widower with a spotty employment history but solid references. He'd practiced the role for weeks, studying the mannerisms and speech patterns of working-class men, buying clothes from thrift stores and learning to carry himself differently. The transformation had been so complete that even he sometimes forgot who he really was. The work itself had been therapeutic in ways he hadn't expected. There was something deeply satisfying about restoring order to chaos, about making things clean and functional for the children who would arrive each morning. He'd forgotten the simple pleasure of completing tasks with his hands, of seeing immediate results from his efforts. Unlike the abstract world of corporate finance, mopping floors and fixing broken desks produced tangible, immediate improvements. But it was Lily Chen who had truly brought him back to life. The first time he'd seen her nameplate on her desk, the familiar surname had stopped him cold. When he'd overheard her speaking Mandarin with her grandmother during pickup, he'd realized that this quiet, brilliant child was walking the same path he'd traveled 40 years earlier. The worn clothes, the careful way she treated her few possessions, the fierce pride mixed with vulnerability, all of it had transported him back to his own childhood. Lily's grandmother Ming reminded him painfully of his own mother, who had passed away 10 years earlier, still believing that her son's success had somehow made him ashamed of his heritage. Ming worked at a Chinese restaurant downtown, just as his mother had worked at the laundromat. She picked up Lily each day in a car that badly needed repairs she couldn't afford, speaking to her granddaughter in rapid Mandarin about homework and chores and being grateful for opportunities. What Marcus had learned about Lily's situation had broken his heart. Her parents had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, leaving her in the care of her 68-year-old grandmother who spoke limited English and worked double shifts to pay rent on their small apartment. Ming was proud and stubborn, refusing help from social services and church groups, determined to provide for Lily through her own efforts, just as Marcus's parents had done for him. But unlike his childhood, when his parents had at least had each other for support, Ming was facing the challenge alone. Her arthritis made the restaurant work increasingly difficult, and Lily often helped with translation during parent-teacher conferences and medical appointments. The 8-year-old had become her grandmother's primary connection to the English-speaking world, a responsibility that weighed heavily on her small shoulders. Marcus had started small, leaving books that would challenge Lily's advanced reading level and occasionally finding supplies that the school was supposedly discarding. When he'd learned that Ming was struggling to pay for Lily's school pictures and field trip fees, he'd anonymously established a fund that covered such expenses for students in need. Each intervention had to be carefully orchestrated to avoid triggering Ming's pride or raising suspicions about his true identity. The more time he spent observing Lily, the more he saw his younger self in her careful navigation of two worlds. At school, she was an American student who spoke perfect English and excelled in every subject. At home, she was Ming's translator and emotional support, helping with bills and paperwork, while maintaining the respectful deference expected in traditional Chinese families. The weight of responsibility she carried was far too heavy for someone so young. Marcus had also noticed things that others missed. How Lily sometimes arrived at school tired, because she'd stayed up late helping Ming with restaurant paperwork. How she declined invitations to birthday parties because she knew Ming couldn't afford gifts. How she never complained about wearing the same few outfits while her classmates showed off new clothes. The resilience was admirable, but it reminded him too much of his own lonely childhood. What had surprised him was how much joy he'd found in their quiet friendship. Lily had started lingering after school to help him organize supplies, chattering about her day while he worked. She'd tell him about books she was reading, problems she was solving in math class, and dreams she had of becoming a doctor someday. In return, he'd shared carefully edited stories about his own childhood, always framing them as tales from a friend rather than personal experiences. Their conversations had revealed Lily's sharp intelligence and natural curiosity about the world beyond her immediate circumstances. She asked thoughtful questions about how things worked, why certain decisions were made, and what opportunities might exist for someone like her. Marcus had found himself looking forward to these discussions more than any board meeting he'd ever attended. Now, watching this fierce little girl defend him against adults who saw him as expendable, Marcus realized that their relationship had evolved into something precious and irreplaceable. In trying to help her, he'd rediscovered a sense of purpose that all his wealth had never provided. She'd given him something far more valuable than money. She'd made him feel needed again, not for what he could buy or invest, but for who he was as a person. The irony wasn't lost on him that the child he'd been trying to protect was now protecting him, standing up to authority figures with a courage that reminded him exactly why he'd been drawn to her in the first place. Whatever happened. Next in this confrontation with Principal Williams, Marcus knew that Lily Chen had already changed his life in ways that would echo far beyond this moment. Principal Williams surveyed the scene with barely concealed irritation, her gaze moving from the defiant 8-year-old to the custodian who had somehow inspired such loyalty. "Mr. Thompson, perhaps it would be best if you completed your duties and left for the day," she said curtly. Lily returned to Mrs. Rodriguez's classroom immediately, but Lily remained planted firmly between them, her small fists clenched at her sides. "He helps me with my reading," Lily announced, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "And he fixes the broken chairs so we can sit properly. And he always makes sure the heat works when it's cold. He's good, not bad." The security guard looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, clearly not wanting to physically remove a child from the equation. Marcus knelt down to Lily's eye level, his voice gentle but firm. "It's all right, little scholar. You should go back to class. I'll finish my work, and everything will be fine." But Lily shook her head stubbornly, a gesture that reminded him so strongly of his own childhood determination that it took his breath away. "No, Mr. Marcus. They're being mean to you like they're mean to me sometimes. It's not fair." The words hung in the air, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. This brave little girl was willing to risk detention, or worse, to defend someone she saw as a friend. In that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. Over the following weeks, what had started as a chance encounter blossomed into an unlikely but profound friendship. Marcus began timing his afternoon cleaning to coincide with Lily's after-school reading time in the library. She would sit at a corner table, homework spread before her, while he quietly worked nearby. Their conversations began tentatively, with Lily asking questions about the books he sometimes left for her to discover. "Mr. Marcus," she said one Thursday afternoon, looking up from a biography of Marie Curie, "do you think someone like me could really become a scientist?" The question was asked with the careful hopefulness of a child who had learned not to expect too much from life. Marcus paused in his sweeping, considering his answer carefully. "I think someone exactly like you could become anything she sets her mind to. The question isn't whether you're smart enough or good enough. The question is whether you're brave enough to keep believing in yourself when other people doubt you." Their relationship deepened through small, everyday moments that meant everything to both of them. When Lily struggled with a particularly difficult math concept, Marcus would sit beside her during his break, patiently working through problems until understanding dawned in her eyes. When the classroom guinea pig needed weekend care and no other families volunteered, Marcus quietly arranged for Lily to take responsibility, knowing it would teach her compassion while giving her something special to look forward to. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday when Lily arrived at school soaked, because Ming's umbrella had broken and they couldn't afford a new one. Marcus noticed her shivering in the hallway, her thin sweater providing little warmth against the building's aggressive air conditioning. That afternoon, he left a small package in her backpack containing a new umbrella, warm gloves, and a thermos for hot chocolate, along with a note that read, "For a special student, from the school supply closet." Lily had approached him the next day with tears in her eyes, holding the note carefully. "Mr. Marcus, I know this came from you. The supply closet doesn't have things this nice." Instead of denying it, Marcus had simply smiled and said, "Sometimes good things appear when we need them most. The important thing is to accept them gracefully and remember to help others when we can." From that day forward, their bond became something deeper than friendship. Lily began saving her artwork to show him, carefully explaining each drawing and the story behind it. Marcus found himself looking forward to these presentations more than any business meeting he'd ever attended. Her creativity and imagination amazed him, but it was her thoughtfulness that truly touched his heart. When Lily learned that Marcus ate lunch alone in the maintenance room, she started bringing extra portions of Ming's homemade dumplings to share. "Nai makes too much," she would say. though Marcus suspected the elderly woman was deliberately cooking extra after Lily had mentioned their friendship. The gesture meant more to him than any expensive business lunch he'd ever attended. Their daily conversations revealed the depth of Lily's intelligence and curiosity. She asked him about his life, and Marcus found himself sharing carefully edited versions of his experiences, always framing them as stories about someone he used to know, rather than personal history. He told her about the importance of education, about working hard even when others didn't believe in you, and about finding ways to help people without expecting recognition. "The person I used to know," Marcus said one afternoon while they organized library books together, "learned that the most rewarding work often happens when nobody's watching. When you help someone just because it's the right thing to do, not because you want praise or thanks." Lily nodded solemnly, her small hands carefully straightening book spines. "Like when you fix our desks without being asked? Or when you remember to put fresh flowers in Mrs. Patterson's classroom because they make her happy." The fact that she'd noticed these small gestures filled Marcus with warmth he hadn't felt in years. As autumn progressed into winter, Marcus began to understand that Lily was fighting battles he recognized all too well. She never complained about the secondhand clothes or the fact that she couldn't afford school pictures, but he saw the way she watched other children with their new backpacks and name-brand sneakers. More concerning was the increasing responsibility she carried at home as Ming's arthritis worsened. "Nai's hands hurt more now," Lily confided one December afternoon. "She tries to hide it, but I see her wincing when she thinks I'm not looking. I help her open jars and carry heavy things, but I wish I could do more." The weight of adult concerns in her young voice broke Marcus's heart. He began finding subtle ways to help without triggering Ming's fierce pride. Anonymous donations appeared in their mailbox to cover heating bills. Gift certificates to the grocery store arrived with no return address. When Ming's car broke down, a local mechanic called to say someone had prepaid for the repairs. Each intervention required careful planning to ensure it couldn't be traced back to him. The relationship reached a new level of trust when Lily began staying after school to help Marcus with his cleaning duties. She would empty small wastebaskets while he mopped floors, chattering about her day and asking questions about everything from the proper way to clean windows to why some cleaning products worked better than others. Her genuine interest in his work made him feel valued in a way that corporate success never had. "Mr. Marcus," she said one snowy afternoon while they worked together in the art room, "why do you like being a janitor? Don't you want to do something more important?" The question was asked without any judgment, just the natural curiosity of a child trying to understand the adult world. Marcus stopped polishing tables and looked at her seriously. "What makes something important, Lily? Is it how much money you make, or how many people know your name? Or is it whether you make a positive difference in the world, even if nobody notices?" He gestured around the clean, organized classroom. "Tomorrow, 30 children will walk into this room ready to learn because it's a welcoming space. Their teacher will be able to focus on teaching instead of worrying about broken supplies or dirty surfaces. That seems pretty important to me." Lily nodded thoughtfully, then surprised him by saying, "I think you make this whole school better, not just because you clean things, but because you care about people. I can tell." The simple observation nearly brought tears to his eyes. Their friendship became a bright spot in both their lives during the difficult winter months. When Lily came down with the flu and missed a week of school, Marcus found himself worrying constantly about her recovery. When she returned, pale and thinner than before, he made sure her favorite books were waiting on her desk and that the classroom was extra warm. "I missed our talks," she told him quietly on her first day back. "Nai takes good care of me, but you're the only person who listens to my ideas about science and books and dreams." The admission revealed how isolated she often felt, carrying adult responsibilities while still being just a child. Marcus began to realize that their relationship was filling emotional needs for both of them. Lily gave him a sense of purpose and connection he'd been missing since Sarah's death. In return, he provided her with the intellectual stimulation and emotional support that Ming, despite her best efforts, couldn't offer due to language barriers and her own overwhelming responsibilities. The turning point came during the school's annual winter festival. Marcus was working late to set up tables and decorations when Lily appeared in the gymnasium, dressed in a simple but clean outfit that Ming had clearly spent time preparing. She looked around at the other families with their expensive cameras and elaborate potluck contributions, and Marcus saw the familiar flash of self-consciousness cross her features. "Mr. Marcus," she said quietly, approaching his corner where he was adjusting the lighting. "Would you like to see my science project? I don't think Nine-Eye really understands it, but I worked really hard on it." She led him to a display about renewable energy sources, complete with a working wind turbine model she'd built from recycled materials. As Marcus examined her project, asking thoughtful questions and genuinely marveling at her ingenuity, other parents and teachers began to take notice. Soon, a small crowd had gathered around Lily's display, drawn by Marcus's enthusiastic engagement and her confident explanations. For the first time, Marcus saw Lily as others should see her, not as the quiet girl with second-hand clothes, but as the brilliant, creative, determined young scientist she was becoming. That night, watching Lily beam with pride as she explained her project to admirers, Marcus realized that their friendship had evolved into something that felt remarkably like family. She trusted him with her dreams and fears, and he found himself making decisions based on what would be best for her future. The love he felt for this remarkable child was as real and powerful as anything he'd ever experienced, even if they shared no blood relation. What he didn't know was that their carefully built world was about to be shattered by forces beyond their control, testing whether their bond was strong enough to survive the storms ahead. The crisis began on a cold February morning when Marcus arrived at school to find Principal Williams waiting in his supply closet with a stern expression and a manila folder in her hands. "Mr. Thompson, we need to discuss some irregularities that have come to my attention," she said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Please take a seat." Marcus felt his stomach drop as she opened the folder, revealing printed emails and financial records. "It has been brought to my attention that there have been numerous anonymous donations to this school over the past several months, always coinciding with situations involving you and certain students. Additionally, there are reports of expensive items appearing in students' belongings after they've spent time with you." The net was closing around him, and Marcus realized that his careful orchestration of help for Lily and other struggling students had finally been noticed. Someone had connected the dots between his presence and the mysterious benefactor who had been quietly supporting the school's neediest families. "Furthermore," Principal Williams continued, "we've discovered that your employment references don't check out completely. Some of the companies you listed have no record of your employment. I'm going to need you to explain these discrepancies immediately, or I'll have no choice but to terminate your employment and contact the authorities about potential fraud." Marcus sat in stunned silence, his mind racing through options. He could reveal his true identity, but that would destroy the simple life he'd built and potentially put Lily in an uncomfortable position. He could continue the deception, but the investigation was clearly closing in. Either way, his time at Riverside Elementary was coming to an end. "I understand your concerns," Marcus said carefully, "but I can assure you that I've never done anything to harm any child in this school. If you feel it's necessary to terminate my employment, I'll accept that decision." He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him beg or scramble to maintain a lie. The termination was immediate and humiliating. Marcus was escorted from the building within the hour, his few personal belongings packed into a cardboard box, while curious students pressed against classroom windows to watch. The worst part was not being able to explain to Lily what was happening, knowing she would arrive that afternoon to find him simply gone. As news of the janitor's sudden dismissal spread through the school, rumors began to fly. Some parents whispered about inappropriate behavior, others speculated about theft or background check failures. The anonymous donations stopped abruptly, and the investigation into their source intensified when parents realized how much money had been flowing into the school from an unknown benefactor. Lily's reaction to Marcus's disappearance was devastating. She waited by the maintenance room after school for 2 hours, convinced he would appear with a reasonable explanation. When Mrs. Rodriguez finally found her there, tears streaming down her face, Lily could only whisper, "Where did Mr. Marcus go? Why didn't he say goodbye?" The explanation that he had been let go due to administrative issues satisfied no one, least of all Lily. She became withdrawn and distracted in class, her grades slipping for the first time in her academic career. Ming, despite her limited English, understood enough to know that her granddaughter was heartbroken over losing someone important. Who was this man? Ming asked Lily in Mandarin during one of their evening conversations. "Why does his leaving hurt you so much?" But Lily struggled to explain the relationship that had meant everything to her, the daily conversations that had made school feel safe, the quiet encouragement that had fed her dreams. For Marcus, the separation was equally torturous. He found himself driving past the school during dismissal time, hoping to catch a glimpse of Lily and reassure himself that she was all right. What he saw broke his heart. The vibrant, confident child he'd known had retreated into herself, walking to Ming's car with slumped shoulders and none of her former enthusiasm. 3 weeks after his termination, the situation became even more complicated when a private investigator showed up at Marcus's apartment. The man introduced himself as Detective Ray Martinez, hired by the school district to trace the source of the anonymous donations and determine whether any laws had been broken. "Mr. Thompson," Martinez said, settling into the modest living room of the small apartment Marcus had rented to maintain his cover. "I think we both know there's more to your story than what's in your employment file. The donations total over $200,000 in 6 months. That's not the kind of money a part-time janitor has access to." Marcus realized that his carefully constructed identity was crumbling completely. The investigation would eventually uncover the truth about his wealth, his real name, and his motivations for working at the school. When that happened, the media attention would be inevitable, and Lily would be thrust into a spotlight that could damage her and Ming's quiet life. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. In an era of heightened awareness about adults who targeted children, his anonymous generosity and special attention to Lily looked suspicious to outsiders who didn't understand the genuine affection between them. "I'm not accusing you of anything yet," Martinez replied, "but a wealthy man hiding his identity to work around children, specifically befriending a vulnerable little girl whose family depends on charity? You have to see how that looks. Parents are scared, and they have a right to know who's been watching their kids." The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow. The pure relationship he'd cherished with Lily was being twisted into something dark and predatory by people who couldn't imagine that genuine care might exist without ulterior motives. The thought that anyone could see his love for that remarkable child as anything other than protective and paternal made him sick. "That little girl means everything to me," Marcus said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Not in any way that you're implying, but because she reminds me of who I used to be. She's brilliant and kind, and deserves every opportunity in the world. If helping her makes me a suspect in your eyes, then you've lost sight of what really matters." But the damage was already spreading beyond the investigation. Parents at Riverside Elementary had organized meetings to discuss the, quote, security breach that had allowed an unvetted individual to have unsupervised access to their children. The anonymous donations, which had helped dozens of families, were now viewed as evidence of manipulation and grooming rather than genuine philanthropy. Lily became an unwitting focal point of the controversy when word spread that she had been the janitor's favorite. Other parents began looking at her differently, some with pity, others with suspicion. Classmates repeated fragments of conversations they'd overheard at home, asking Lily intrusive questions about her friendship with Mr. Marcus that she didn't understand but instinctively knew were hurtful. The stress began affecting Lily's health. She developed stomach aches that kept her home from school, and Ming noticed that she was having trouble sleeping. The confident child who had defended Marcus against authority figures just months earlier was becoming anxious and withdrawn, confused by the adult emotions swirling around a relationship that had brought her nothing but joy. Ming, despite her limited understanding of the situation, recognized that her granddaughter was suffering. She made several attempts to contact the school for clarification, but the language barrier and the sensitive nature of the investigation made meaningful communication nearly impossible. All she knew was that a man who had been important to Lily was gone, and her granddaughter was heartbroken. The breaking point came when Lily overheard 2 mothers talking in the school parking lot, their voices carrying clearly through Ming's open car window. "I heard he was giving her expensive gifts," one woman said. "A man like that doesn't help a child without expecting something in return." That poor grandmother probably had no idea what was really going on. Lily didn't understand all the implications, but she understood enough to know they were saying terrible things about Mr. Marcus. That evening, she asked Ming in Mandarin whether Mr. Marcus had been a bad man, whether she had done something wrong by being his friend. The questions revealed how deeply the adult suspicions had penetrated her 8-year-old understanding of the world. For Marcus, the final blow came when his real identity was uncovered. Detective Martinez arrived at his apartment with a satisfied expression and a thick file containing corporate records, real estate holdings, and newspaper clippings documenting his business success. Marcus Chen, founder of Thompson Logistics, net worth approximately $800 million, Martinez announced. Care to explain why one of the state's wealthiest men has been masquerading as a janitor? The revelation would be impossible to contain. Once the media learned that a billionaire had been secretly working at an elementary school, the story would explode across every news outlet in the country. Lily and Ming would be photographed, interviewed, and dissected by reporters looking for angles about wealth, deception, and inappropriate relationships. Their quiet life would be destroyed by the very man who had tried to protect and improve it. "You have 48 hours to come forward voluntarily," Martinez told him. "After that, this goes public through official channels. If I were you, I'd get ahead of the story and control the narrative while you still can." As Marcus sat alone in his apartment that night, staring at the business card Martinez had left behind, he realized that his attempt to find purpose and connection had created a disaster that would hurt the one person he'd been trying to help. Lily didn't deserve to have her childhood destroyed by media attention and public speculation about their friendship. Ming didn't deserve to have her family's privacy invaded because a wealthy stranger had fallen in love with her granddaughter's bright spirit. The cruelest irony was that Marcus had never felt more fulfilled than during his months as a simple janitor who meant something to a lonely little girl. Now that happiness was about to be exposed as the elaborate deception it had always been, leaving both of them worse off than when they'd started. He had 2 days to figure out how to protect Lily from the storm that was coming, even if it meant disappearing from her life forever. Outside his window, snow began to fall on the city where he'd built an empire and lost a family, where he'd found love and was about to lose it again. Tomorrow he would have to make the hardest decision of his life, whether to fight for the relationship that meant everything to him, or sacrifice it to save the child he loved from the consequences of his deception. Marcus made his decision at dawn. Instead of hiding from the media storm about to break, he would face it head-on, but on his own terms. He called Detective Martinez and arranged a press conference for that afternoon at Riverside Elementary, with one condition. Lily and Ming would be protected from media intrusion, and he would explain everything publicly to clear any suspicions about his motives. The school gymnasium filled with reporters, parents, and curious onlookers as Marcus walked to the podium. Gone was the humble janitor in worn coveralls, replaced by the composed businessman in a tailored suit. But his eyes searched the crowd until he found what he was looking for. Lily sitting beside Ming in the back row, her small face a mixture of confusion and hope. "My name is Marcus Chen," he began, his voice steady despite the chaos of camera flashes. "For the past 8 months, I worked at this school as Marcus Thompson, a custodian. I lied about my identity, but I never lied about my intentions." He told them everything: his childhood at this same school, his wife's death, his desperate search for meaning, and how a brilliant little girl had saved him from despair. "I donated money anonymously because I remembered being that child who needed help but was too proud to ask for it. I befriended Lily Chen because she reminded me of my younger self, and because every adult should have at least one champion in their corner." His voice broke slightly as he looked directly at Lily. "She gave me more than I ever gave her. She made me remember what it felt like to matter to someone." The crowd had grown silent, hanging on every word. Marcus continued. "I know how this looks to protective parents, and I understand your concerns. But I'm asking you to judge me by my actions, not my deceptions. Every maybe dollar I donated went to help struggling families. Every moment I spent with any child was in service of their education and well-being." Principal Williams stood up from the audience, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Chen, while your motivations may have been pure, you still violated our trust and our employment policies. How can we be sure this won't happen again?" Marcus nodded solemnly. "You can't, and you shouldn't have to worry about it. I'm announcing today the establishment of the Sarah Chen Foundation, named after my late wife, with an initial endowment of $50 million dedicated to supporting underprivileged students in our district. The foundation will operate transparently, with full oversight and accountability." The real test came when the press conference ended and Lily approached the podium, Ming following nervously behind. "Mr. Marcus," she said quietly, using the name she'd always known him by, "are you really rich?" When he nodded, she asked the question that mattered most. Are you still my friend? Marcus knelt to her level, his eyes filling with tears. I will always be your friend, Lily, if your Nai allows it, and if you can forgive me for not telling you the truth. Ming, who had been silent throughout the revelation, surprised everyone by speaking in careful English. You help my granddaughter. You help many children. Good heart more important than true name. 6 months later, Marcus stood in a different role at Riverside Elementary, not as a janitor but as a volunteer reading tutor working under the Foundation's community outreach program. The transformation had been remarkable. Dozens of struggling students now received tutoring, nutrition assistance, and enrichment opportunities that would have been impossible before. Lily had thrived in the aftermath of the revelation, her confidence restored, and her academic performance reaching new heights. The Foundation had established a special science scholarship in her name, ensuring her path to becoming the doctor she dreamed of being. More importantly, she and Marcus had maintained their friendship, now built on complete honesty and mutual respect. The day that would define their relationship forever came during Lily's high school graduation 10 years later. As valedictorian, she walked across the stage to thunderous applause, but it was the moment afterward that made headlines around the world. Instead of joining her classmates for photos, Lily approached Marcus, who had been sitting proudly in the front row beside Ming. "Mr. Marcus," she said, using the name she'd never stopped calling him, "I have something important to ask you." The gymnasium fell silent as she took his weathered hands in hers. "You've been more than a friend to me, more than a mentor. You've been the father figure I needed when I needed it most. Next month, when I marry David, would you do me the honor of walking me down the aisle?" Through tears that he didn't try to hide, Marcus whispered, "It would be the greatest privilege of my life." As the crowd erupted in applause, Lily hugged the man who had taught her that family isn't always about blood, and that sometimes the most profound love grows from the simplest acts of kindness. The wedding made national news not because of Marcus's wealth, but because of the beautiful story of how a secret millionaire and a determined little girl had found each other when they both needed saving. Their bond had survived scandal, separation, and the test of time, proving that genuine love always finds a way to endure. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.